You know that saying, remember, as far as anybody knows, we are a nice, normal family. It's kind of funny, right? We all know families have their quirks.
Hmm. They're layers.
Exactly. But today we're going, well, a bit deeper than just the usual complications. We're looking into the real impact of childhood trauma, stuff that shapes us in ways maybe we don't even consciously realize.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is how we usually assume our struggles. Anxieties, fears, they just come from our lives, our direct experiences.
Right, things that happen to us.
But what if there's more? What if echoes from the past, maybe from parents or grandparents? What if that trauma is still playing out now?
Okay, let's definitely unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into this idea of inherited trauma. We're using Mark Wolyn's book, It Didn't Start With You, as our guide here.
Yeah, it's a really insightful book.
Our mission basically is to figure out how unresolved stuff from previous generations might be, I guess, molding how we feel and act today,
Mm,
and maybe find some tools to see those connections more clearly.
exactly. Because,
Wow.
if you're listening and something feels off, maybe you have anxieties or fears that don't seem to quite connect to your own life story.
Yeah, like where did that come from?
Right. This conversation might shed some light. We're hoping to explore those sort of hidden roots.
Yeah, that first thought that it's all our stuff that feels logical, doesn't it? We look at our own experiences to understand ourselves.
If default, yeah.
But this idea of inherited trauma, like the book lays out, it really pushes back on that assumption.
It really does. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. Someone goes through something truly traumatic. The fear, the coping mechanisms they develop just to survive.
The hypervigilance, maybe.
Exactly. All of that.
Yeah.
It doesn't just vanish when the event is over. It leaves an imprint. And potentially not just on them, but carried forward somehow.
Okay, this is where it gets really, really interesting for me. The book tells this story about a woman with really intense claustrophobia.
Right. Fear of small spaces.
Yeah, and it felt totally irrational to her. She couldn't find anything in her own life, no event, that explained this overwhelming fear.
And the key insight there, what's so striking, is how that unprocessed trauma seems to just manifest generations down the line
Yeah.
in ways that seem completely unrelated on the surface.
So what was the connection for her?
Well, digging into her family history revealed that relatives on her mother's side had been gassed in a Nazi concentration camp. Horrific.
Oh, wow.
And the family members who survived, understandably, probably never fully processed that horror, that deep, unresolved fear and anxiety. It seems like it was somehow passed down, eventually showing up as her claustrophobia decades later.
And it's not just like an emotional feeling passed down, is it? The book gets into the biology, too, the genetics. It talks about research by psychiatrist Rachel Yehuda.
Yes. Dr. Yehuda's work is crucial here.
Yeah.
She did this really important study looking at pregnant women who were directly impacted by 9/11 and developed PTSD.
Yeah.
And what they did was measure cortisol levels, the main stress hormone in both these mothers and their newborn babies.
And what did they find?
This is the really remarkable part. Both the mothers with PTSD and their babies had lower than average cortisol levels.
Huh. Lower. You'd think trauma would mean higher stress hormones. Why is low cortisol significant here?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive at first. But think of our stress response like a
Yeah.
dial. Normally, stress hits, cortisol spikes, helps us react fight or flight, and then things level out again.
Right, the normal response.
But in some people with PTSD, after really intense trauma,
Yeah.
it's like that dial gets stuck on low. Dr. Yehuda's work suggests that maybe if there isn't enough cortisol right at the time of the trauma,
Okay.
it can kind of mess up that initial response system. And that disruption might actually make someone more prone to developing triggers later on.
So the body's natural shock absorption system didn't quite work right in that moment.
Kind of like that, yeah. And then you bring in the biological link. There's a biologist, Brian Lipton, who's quoted saying trauma can biochemically alter the genetic expression of offspring.
Call to the genetic expression. Wow.
Yeah. So if you put Lipton's idea together with Yehuda's findings on cortisol, it starts to suggest that trauma isn't just an emotional story we inherit. It might be, well, literally passed down genetically.
Okay, so that's what Yehuda means by intergenerational transmission.
That's the core concept. Intergenerational transmission. It means the impact of trauma can literally be inherited. So those feelings you might have, fear, nervousness, anxiety, that don't seem to have a clear source in your life.
Yeah.
They could actually be echoes from your family's past,
Yeah.
encoded, both emotionally and maybe even biochemically, genetically.
So thinking about, say, grandparents or great-grandparents who survived the Holocaust or went through a war and had PTSD, those anxieties I feel sometimes, even if my life is relatively calm, they could have roots way back then.
It's a very real possibility, according to this research, passed down through how families relate, the stories told or not told, but also potentially through these biological pathways. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. How much is me and how much is history?
Exactly. Now, the book also brings up something we hear a lot about childhood relationships. You know, the old blame your mother idea is simplistic, obviously.
Right, a bit of trope.
But our early connections with parents, they do have a profound impact, whether those relationships were nurturing or difficult or somewhere in between.
Absolutely. And Wallen outlines these four unconscious themes that often crop up in those parent-child dynamics. It's not about blame, right? It's about seeing patterns.
Precisely. Seeing patterns that might connect to trauma. So
Mhm.
the themes he identifies are, first, codependent relationships. Second, actively rejecting a parent.
Okay.
Third, a disrupted relationship with the mother. And he's quite specific here, meaning like a separation before age 3, or maybe a history in foster care. And fourth, the big one we're talking about, inherited trauma itself.
Got it. Codependency, rejection, disruption with mother, inherited trauma.
And what's useful is that exploring these themes, especially using what Woolen calls the core language approach, can be a really powerful way to start untangling the impact of trauma, whether it's yours or inherited.
So how does that approach work? What are the first steps?
It starts with really describing, using specific words, how you feel about your parents, and also recalling particular moments, specific memories.
Okay, so not just my dad was tough, but maybe drilling down.
Exactly. You might move from my dad was tough to something more descriptive, like my father was emotionally manipulative.
Right.
And then you'd explore, okay, what's a specific time that happened? How did that feel back then? How might that feeling still be, echoing now? It's about getting concrete.
Moving from that vague unease to something you can actually point to.
Yes. And building on that, the book really emphasizes how important it is to put your fears into words, those deep anxieties you might carry around.
Yeah, the ones you maybe don't even say out loud.
Right. Think about being a kid, afraid of the dark, or a monster under the bed. Just naming it, saying, I'm scared of the monster. Sometimes that alone takes away some of its power.
Okay, makes sense.
It's a similar idea with internalized trauma. Verbalizing the fear is a way to start confronting it.
And this leads to what the book calls the core complaint and the core sentence.
Exactly. The core complaint is basically identifying your biggest fear right now, the one you suspect is linked to the trauma. So it might be something like, I'm afraid my trauma's made me a toxic person, or maybe I'm afraid I'm pushing everyone in my life away.
Okay, that's the complaint. What's the core sentence then?
The core sentence is the feared outcome. What you're really afraid will happen because of that core complaint. So if the complaint is, I'm afraid I'm toxic, the core sentence might be, I'm afraid that I'll end up hurting the people I love the most.
Or if it's, I'm pushing people away.
The core sentence could be, I'm afraid of ending up completely alone, or I'm afraid of losing my partner. Saying these things, even just to yourself, it can feel really scary.
I can imagine. But necessary, it sounds like.
Yeah, a really vital step towards understanding and healing.
Okay, but when we're talking specifically about inherited trauma, something that didn't happen directly to us, how do we even begin to trace that? Where do you look?
That's a great question, and that's where the core language map becomes really useful. It builds on what we just discussed.
Okay.
It takes your core sentence and your core complaint and adds what Woolen calls core descriptors, those first words you use to describe your parents or the feeling itself, and then, crucially, the core trauma.
Which is the potential traumatic event back in the family history.
Exactly. So this map becomes your kind of investigation tool. It helps you structure your exploration of your family's past, looking for connections.
And part of that exploration uses bridging questions, right?
Sure.
How do those work? How do they help link my fear now to something that happened way back when?
Bridging questions are designed specifically to make those potential links. So let's say your core complaint involves a deep fear of losing a child, even if you don't have children yet, or things are fine.
Okay.
A bridging question might be, did anyone in my family, my parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, ever experience the death of a child? Or maybe a miscarriage or stillbirth?
Ah, okay. So you're looking for parallel experiences.
Exactly. The book gives an example, I think, of a grandmother who tragically lost a child and carried immense guilt, blaming herself. That unresolved grief and guilt could potentially ripple down the generations.
Wow. The book also suggests something really practical,
Yeah.
actually drawing out a family tree.
Yes, a visual family tree. And then next to each person, noting down any traumatic events you know about or maybe suspect.
And we need to think broadly about trauma here, don't we?
Absolutely. It's not just the huge obvious things, though those count too, like domestic violence, sudden deaths, accidents, surviving war or genocide like the Holocaust, PTSD. But it also includes things like severe psychological abuse, really painful divorces or betrayals, maybe financial ruin, forced migration.
Yeah.
Things that leave deep emotional scars can also be part of this inherited legacy.
Okay, so we've maybe identified some potential family sources. We've put our own core fears into words using the complaint and sentence. What's the next big step? How do you move towards, well, peace with this stuff?
Making peace is the goal, absolutely. And the book stresses that just doing that work, recognizing the patterns, verbalizing the fears, creating that core language map is huge progress already.
Just the awareness itself is powerful.
Immensely powerful. But yeah, the journey continues. The next phase is really about actively working towards healing. And language, again, plays a big part.
Okay, and this is where the healing sentence comes in. How does that work?
So the healing sentence is basically a way to consciously counter-program that negative core sentence you identified.
Like an antidote.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
If your core sentence reflects a deep belief like I'm worthless or I'm damaged beyond repair or I'll never get better,
Right.
your healing sentence is a direct, positive, present tense affirmation that challenges that. So the book gives examples like I refuse to relive what happened to me, or I am not defined by my trauma, or maybe I choose to move forward and grow.
So you're actively replacing the negative thought pattern.
You're actively stating a different reality, a different intention. It's about retraining your brain, in a way, repeating it, internalizing it.
And the book also mentions something else, these symbolic ceremonial acts. What's the idea behind doing something like that?
For some people, not everyone, but for some, adding a physical or symbolic act can really help make the shift feel more real, more concrete. It can provide a sense of closure or release.
Like what kind of acts?
Oh, it could be anything that feels meaningful to the individual. Maybe lighting a candle and speaking your healing sentence. Maybe writing a letter to an ancestor, expressing understanding or forgiveness, and then burning it safely.
Or like releasing a balloon with a message?
Exactly. Something that symbolizes letting go of the old pattern or honoring the past while choosing a different future. The specific act isn't the point. It's the personal meaning and the intention you put behind it.
And feels important to say these healing steps, the core language map, the healing sentences, even the ceremonies, they aren't just for inherited trauma, are they?
Oh, absolutely not. This whole process, identifying the core complaint, understanding the feared outcome, reframing the narrative with healing sentences, that's incredibly valuable for dealing with the impact of any trauma, whether it happened generations ago or much more recently in your own life.
Right. It's a set of tools for understanding and healing trauma's impact, period.
Precisely.
Okay, so if we were to boil down our deep dive today, the really key takeaway seems to be, if you're dealing with trauma's effects, it's so important to understand it might not have started with you.
Yes. That feeling of what's wrong with me
Hmm.
might have deeper roots. You're not necessarily to blame for carrying these feelings.
The legacy of family trauma is real, and it can shape our lives in profound ways.
Absolutely. And remember those tools we talked about, the core language map, to help make sense of your fears and where they might come from.
Those bridging questions to connect your current feelings to your family's past experiences.
The power of creating and using those healing sentences to start consciously rewriting your own internal story.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with today. Just consider this. What unspoken stories, what unresolved feelings or events might be part of your own family's history?
Things maybe never talked about.
Yeah. Could exploring those hidden narratives, gently and respectfully, offer you a new lens for understanding yourself? Perhaps even open up a path toward a different kind of healing. Just think about the possibility that what feels so deeply personal right now might also be carrying whispers from the past.